Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Greet the Week. I'm Mona Duncan, and I'm here with my co-host, Jan Moray. And Jan came up with our topic for today by saying that she saw a title for a training course the other day, and it was entitled "Guilt is a Bully." And she wants to explore that. So what's on your mind, Jan?
Well, I thought that was an interesting way to reframe guilt, because so many times we feel crippled by guilt. You know, we want to do something, but yet we feel guilty for doing it because maybe we're leaving somebody else behind, or we're spending too much money to do it. And then we've got this horrible feeling of guilt. And then we're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do it because I feel so guilty. And then we end up missing a lot of things in life, and because we're letting guilt dictate what we do, because we're listening to those feelings of guilt more so than to those feelings of what's really best for me now. And so I thought if we were to look at guilt as a bully, that maybe we wouldn't put so much weight into what our guilty feelings were telling us. And I've done a little bit of reading on guilt and some suppositions of why it came about. And it was tens of thousands of years ago, because man couldn't protect himself and herself, and so we had to live in a tribe. We had to live with a group of people, because if we went on our own, that we weren't able to survive. And so that emotion of guilt developed to help to keep us together with all the other people that were going to help to make us safe. And though we still do need people in our lives today, it's not in the same manner as we did. And maybe those guilt feelings aren't as important for us anymore, and don't serve as much of a purpose as they once did. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting way to look at guilt. Let's not take it as something that we have to listen to, but as something that we can stop and say, okay, but wait a minute, let me think about this a little bit more. Do I need to listen to these guilt feelings, or shall I go ahead and do what I was going to do?
Okay. And so if we listen to those guilt feelings, do we become a hero or a monster?
Well, I guess if we want to look at ourselves as a monster, I mean, I think of, as young mothers, I remember when I used to take my children to get to daycare, because I worked. I had a job that I had to work, every day of the week, and I took my kids to daycare. But I understood, for me, I was not the kind of person who could stay home with them all day long. That would not probably have been the best thing for me or for my children. And so I felt like taking them to the daycare was the right thing for me. But I know a lot of mothers felt very guilty dropping their children off, especially once the children start crying. And, because they want mommy there. They don't want you to leave them behind. And so, you feel, I felt those feelings of guilt, but then I had to think, well, okay, yeah, I'm leaving my child behind, but I picked the best place I could find, and I know they're getting good care. I can come anytime I want to. And so I had to work through those guilt feelings so that I could do what I felt was really best for all of us.
And so when you picked them up in the afternoon, did they run into your arms gladly to be there, or did they not want to leave?
Well, it depends. It depended on what they were doing that day and how old they were.
Right.
The older they got, they were doing a lot more interesting things there, and they had a lot of their friends there, so they weren't quite ready to go. But when they were really young, they were happy to be there and ready.
And then if you had to prod them to come on and let's go, is there a little guilt there of taking them away?
That's right. So you can't escape it. You can't escape that guilt. It's going to follow you wherever you are, and so it's to know how to deal with it. Some of that guilt is probably a good thing,
or at least it will follow as long as we allow it to be a bully in our life.
That's true. That's true.
Until, with the amount of knowledge that we have, which that's the only knowledge that we have at the time. We can always get more information, but with the knowledge that we have at the time, and with what we are currently aware of what our internal motives are and our intentions are, if we're doing the best we can, then maybe we need to give ourselves a little compassion.
Right, and I think that's what's so important about it, is we need to ask the question, are we doing what's best in this situation, the best solution for everyone involved? And yeah, I'm sure my children probably would have preferred having me at home all the time and staying home with me and staying home with me, but I really knew that I could not do that 24/7. I just knew that I couldn't. But then that made the times when we did spend time together that much more enjoyable, at least for me. Hopefully it was for them as well.
Right.
I tried to make sure that they did have my attention, and I was there to do things.
Well, they might have gained quite a bit by being in daycare also, and relating to other children outside of your family. Maybe they gained, and you weren't there, so you don't necessarily see all that, but that might be an advantage in the long run for them also. They may have become more socialized by being among a whole bunch of other kids rather than staying at home.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, Jerry, and that's, some of the stuff that I thought about too, that there are advantages to being in daycare. And then I remember once when my son was pretty young, he might have been, 18 months old or something like that, and we had a party at the house, and all the women wanted to hold him, and they all were holding him, and they go, oh, or maybe he was younger than that, and they were going, oh, this is such a sweet baby. It doesn't bother him that all of us are holding him. He's not crying to go back to you. And I'm like, well, I guess that is a good thing, because he's used to having a lot of different people holding him and taking care of him. So it wasn't that traumatic for him to have somebody else come pick him up.
So I guess one of the things that we need to constantly have in our mind is that, well, someone made the comment one time, said, if there's two people having a conversation, you have three opinions.
What?
Three opinions. And that's the thing of it is we are so changeable, and we see something that gives us a little insight, and so we may, oh yeah, I agree with that, and so we're always changing the way we see things, because there's always input coming in, whether it's a guilty input or another input or just something else that someone says. So there's just so much diversity there.
Right.
And it is becoming friends with yourself and continually looking at what our intentions are.
Correct.
And if there's some definite evidence showing that what our intentions are have turned kind of bullified or turned to be not so good, that we rethink.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. That you have to go back to what are your intentions, what's your reason, your motive for doing this. But if those guilt feelings keep coming back, then maybe you do need to question, say, okay, am I really on the right track, or do I need to think about this some more, or do something?
Yeah. And even sometimes, we want to get other people's input, and we get it, and more confused.
Right. Now I'm so confused. I don't know what to do. I can see your side. I can see your side. I see my side. But which one is the right one to do at this time?
So it comes down to the bottom line is that we each hoe our own row. We each live our own life. We are responsible for the choices that we make, and everything that comes along presents and almost even demands that we make a choice.
Right. And we have to make a choice that's right for us, and not trying to please everybody around us, because we're going to have to live with whatever choice it is that we make.
And even though we're not trying to, maybe wanting to somewhat be amenable to those around us, the thing of it is that you just can't please everyone.
You cannot.
And not expect them to please us. So it's a little bit of living with and being okay with that frustration that may be there.
Right.
May I add something?
Sure.
I'm just thinking about when after my husband had been diagnosed with ALS and what have you, and it was an issue of caretaking and what and how we were going to do what we were going to do. What I remember was he was a veteran, and the VA actually had said to me at some point, you know, you may want to get help because that'll allow you to keep loving him instead of resenting him.
Yes.
And it was probably the best thing that they could have said to me, because I'm not a caretaker by heart. Like, that's just not who I am. It's hard for me anyway. And of course, I really oversaw everything because I felt that was my responsibility. But then it was also interesting because I remember speaking with Kim during all of that. And she had said to me, you know, Sue, people leave their loved ones if they really can't do this. I just looked at, you know, I remember saying to her, that can't be possible. How would people do that? And she said, people make choices. And I went, oh my goodness. So this is my choice. And for me to continue to love him, what kind of assistance can we get? And we kept, you know, negotiated back and forth. So it was interesting.
I love the way the person asks you that self-evaluating question, that you may consider the fact that you'll want to get, you may think that you may realize that you need to get some help eventually. So you can continue to love him. And he saw that love there and brought that out and helped you to make that decision that was very honorable for both of you.
And so that those last memories you had were good ones and not when you were tired, frustrated.
Yeah, because I mean, he lived with AIDS helping us probably at least 6 months, if not longer than that.
Wow.
You know, so where we had AIDS 24 hours a day, you know, he still always needed to know where I was and what I was doing. You know, it's like until the very end, he can continue to text, where are you?
Right.
that was the worst text. Where are you? And I'd say, I'm getting something to eat with so-and-so. Bring me something.
Okay.
Right.
You know, so it was very cute because as long as he knew where I was, and then I was coming back because he didn't have a good sense of time by that point. But it was always interesting.
Yeah. And so a lot of times the things that we are guilty over, or maybe place guilt on someone else, is not as honest as we originally think it is.
Well, and again, I think some of it is in the self-evaluation process to go back and say, you know, I wish I had. You know, I'm sorry I did it this way. I wish I had done it that way.
Right. And that's where you have to come in with being willing to forgive yourself.
Doing the best that you can do, given the information you presently have.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. But that guilt as a bully.
Right. So Jerry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think all emotions have their usefulness if, and that's a huge word, if they're appropriate. Anger, there is appropriate anger and inappropriate anger. There's appropriate guilt and inappropriate guilt. And I think maturity and wisdom comes from learning when is it appropriate to be guilty and when is it not appropriate to feel that guilt. Same with anger. There are times when anger is absolutely necessary and appropriate. Unfortunately, most of the time we get angry and it's not appropriate, not helpful, not useful. It's destructive. But there are times when it is constructive. Same with guilt. And I think a lot of people experience too much guilt over things, but sometimes it's necessary. I believe that one of the biggest problems that humanity has is an inability to admit our mistakes. A refusal to admit our mistakes. And we make the same mistake again. When I say we, I'm talking on an individual basis and on a national basis.
But I think those feelings are, they're just our feelings. We don't really make a judgment on whether it's appropriate or not, but then we can step back and determine what we do about those feelings.
The action following.
How we respond, whether we're going to act out on that anger, whether we're going to act out on that guilt, or
Yes.
say, no, if this is not an appropriate time to do that or to say anything about it.
Even having those feelings, even if you don't act out on them, they can still be destructive.
They can.
There are plenty of angry people who don't act on them, and it diminishes the value of their life.
Acting on them can take can look at a lot of different things. I mean, you can act on it by lashing out at somebody else, or you can act on it by, well, maybe I need to talk to somebody so we can have a conversation and can come, eye to eye on what we're talking about. Or maybe I act on it by, okay, today I need something else to distract me from these angry feelings. And then so there's a difference between trying to suppress the emotion and dealing with it. Because when you suppress with it, you're right, it doesn't go away. It's going to come back somehow, some way.
Yeah, and it manifests in subtle ways that you may not be aware of.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, with all of those emotions, we have to own them before we realize if it's something I want to keep because that's really me, or if I'm owning the fact that I'm angry about this, I'm owning the fact that I'm guilty over this, that how much legitimacy is there. Because if we don't own our own feelings, then, well, they take on a life of their own, and everything does get way out of hand and out of kilter, and
but
messes everything up.
Many feelings are so subtle, you're not even aware sometimes that you're feeling them.
So that comes back to getting honest with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Getting real honest, even when it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Even when it hurts.
And sometimes you can be surprised about what you're feeling. It's like, wow, where did that come from?
Right. And it's looking at the fact that everything has a counter to it. That's kind of how you stay in balance, that it has a counter to it. And just like the grace, the positive part of reverence, of, revering someone and holding them in high esteem and all of that, is balanced by that negative of pride. That how can I reverence you because this is what I know and my knowing is so much better than your knowing. And sometimes even not even considering where another person is coming from because we have already come to all the conclusions of what things should be. And so it's realizing the fact and that whenever we say something ugly about someone, which I happened to mention into that the other day, I was talking, just yesterday actually, I was talking with Garland and I just let it right out. Well, no wonder they had that ramification happen because this is the flaw in their personality. Boy, I just hit it right on the head. And I mean, Garland was even agreeing with me. And then later that afternoon, I was driving, going somewhere, and I began to think that, you know what, that person that I pointed out that flaw and just maybe exploded it a little bit is really a very wonderful person and very kind-hearted, and they do a lot of good. And it dawned on me that it was my pride of them that I was not showing reverence for him. That he was a person that was of value of esteem. And the thing of it is that's every person on the face of the earth. It's every person. Even the person on death row, they have value as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And it's realizing that sometimes our view of the world can become real distorted.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you hear so many stories of people whose lives start falling apart. But then you hear about what they had to go through, what all they went through that put them on that road. And they just don't know what else to do. Maybe they don't have the support that they need from parents or other adults or teachers or whatever. And it's just one step after another after another. And then once they get so far along, it's not easy to turn back around. They don't know how to turn back around. They don't know what to do or who to turn to. And you read some of those stories, and they're pretty heartbreaking. And so if you kind of look at these people who are struggling and living a life that we don't approve of, to take a moment to say, well, what is their story? What can I learn about this person? How did this person get to where they are? What happened to them?
And then you can have a little compassion for, and it's not to excuse the things that was wrong. It's not to excuse that. It's to say that most errors are correctable. Most are. And they're probably most forgivable also, even though sometimes people do account for their errors and there's still not forgiveness given there.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have to realize that we as human beings are a mixed bag of emotions and experiences and viewpoints and everything. And
Yeah. And then I think sometimes the shame or the guilt of coming clean and letting people know what you went through and some of the things that you did that you're not so proud of are keeping people from getting the help that they need, or going back and saying, hey, I know I've wronged you and I really feel bad about it, but it's hard to have that conversation.
it is, because yeah, it is. It's real hard to have that conversation. It takes a lot of humility to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That realizing that there's an error that needs to be at least addressed, so that it can begin, like putting oil on it, putting salve on it, so that there can begin to be a little bit of healing there for all involved,
Right.
for the one that inflicted the pain as well as the one that received the pain.
Yeah, so if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, if you still feel that shame and guilt associated with that, then that keeps you on the road to continue doing what you've been doing, because you just don't know how to get off that track.
Right. And so when that guilt does come, acknowledge it. Whenever I begin to realize that, well, that was pretty prideful of pointing out that person's flaws. And there was a little tinge of guilt. I mean, it wasn't guilt. I didn't, I wasn't, but I realized that I became aware of the fact that when I really get honest there, that, I'm sure that's in me too. It's there. It's there. The anger, the disreverence, the selfishness, all of that is there. But as we become aware of it, that guilt, rather than just suppressing it, it's, oh, thank you for
bringing it up.
letting me see that.
Yeah.
So I can correct it here and there. And then when I made my apologies, that I regret I even said that, then sometimes we just need to stop it with that rather than, but.
Yes.
I wonder to what degree are there people, as Jerry was talking about before, are there times when, in a sense, it would be more appropriate for people to actually feel guilty, perceiving that something they had done was offensive or hurt someone's feelings, and are there people who just don't seem to perceive that they're wrong or perceive that they've, offended anybody else, or it's only information. So if you choose to be offended, why should I feel guilty?
But you do
so
anyway.
It becomes very paradoxical,
Right.
and it's like you can't take back. But I just wonder, and I also wonder about temperament. Like I think we always question that from a behavioral aspect, like is how much choice, how far does choice go when people have the type of temperament that is more reactive, than other people. Whether you want to say type A, type B, that, okay, we have control, but some people have a little bit less.
Right. They can still change that. They just have to be aware that that's the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the feedback. The feedback, not only external, but the internal feedback. That if I'm having more discomfort within, then maybe there was an error there that needs to be at least acknowledged so I don't continually repeat it.
Yeah.
And then pat myself on the back in a humble way for seeing that and learning it.
Right.
And then drawing on the courage and the strength to follow through with either, to follow through.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone else was curt to us and, gave more information than we needed, or in a way, give them a little grace also.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
What's the criteria for determining whether guilt is appropriate or not? What determines good guilt from bad guilt? What distinguishes the two?
Well, to me, it's peace.
It's what?
Peace, P-E-A-C-E, peace.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm at peace that there's not that but back and forth. It's just settled. Anytime we don't know what to do, it's because you're driving yourself crazy over something. It's because you haven't come to a conclusion. So I want to come to a conclusion that brings peace to my mind, to my heart, to my intentions, to anything that I can kind of measure by. And if it may be for the moment because it's placated, but it comes back again later, that needs to be looked at again.
Yeah, because I'm thinking it takes several iterations to go through that. Because will you feel the peace right away, or you have to follow through with your actions for a while, and that peace will come.
Yeah, it's kind of like every seed that's planted. It takes a little while for it to bloom into a full plant.
Yeah.
And it starts internally. It starts with decisions and seeing if that's the kind of plant that, and then as it begins to grow, sometimes it's planted too close to the house and it's getting, needs to be moved, needs to be transplanted somewhere else.
So I think you have to follow with what you believe is the right way to go, and you have to have thought it through, and you really believe that this is the way it works best for you. And
right.
Then time will tell if you get the peace for doing that. Eventually, then it's the right way. If it's still not, if you're still troubled by it, then it's time to sit back and say, okay, maybe I need to change my thinking. Maybe this wasn't such a good.
Yeah. So it's kind of what's going on in our quality world. Those important people that we've interacted with and how they treated us and how we, and how we interacted with things has a lot to do. Our quality world is people, places, things, events. How we interacted with those things, whether we broke our toys or whether we took good care of them, and whether we were scolded for breaking our toys or whether we were taught to, there's so many layers there, so many things. And then our belief system is a part of that. Our quality world is what we believed about that, about being scolded, or, sometimes we may have been told, oh, well, you're such a good girl, but yet we knew that we had just lied to somebody. Now, how can that be good? Because we were taught that lying was not so good. And we get all these conflicting ideas and emotions, and sometimes we just have to settle it ourselves, because deep down inside there is a balancer. I mean, whether someone else knows we lied or not, if we know we lie, then guess what? We are guilty. There's just no two ways about it, no matter how much we may want to flower it up. And so if that guilt is because, well, you lied, you hurt someone, you this, you that, and it's real, then we have to own it and mend it.
I wonder though, I just went online and I was just looking at some of the definitions of guilt. And it's interesting because the bulk of them are about having committed a specified or implied offense or crime. You know, are about the actual offense of it, having committed a breach, having hurt somebody. And then until you get to the feeling one, there's one that's coming out of Cambridge English Dictionary that is a feeling of worry or unhappiness that you have because you have done something wrong. So it's real interesting because there's the guilt, the actual offense, like in a court of law, you are guilty of, you committed something that is a breach, that is an offense. But then I think there's the other side of it, which is the actual feeling of guilt and of sorrow that I shouldn't have done it that way. I made a bad choice and it consequently hurt me or hurt someone else. So I think it's two pieces. Yeah. So when you talk about guilt as a bully,
yeah,
you know, like where does that fit? And
because we think of guilt as being that we did something wrong. I mean, we've got that perception. But sometimes we didn't do anything wrong. But yet we have that
perception, right?
Yeah, but we have that feeling of guilt, and so that's where it's the bully, because we have that guilt feeling when really we didn't do anything wrong. It's just,
or we did the best we could.
We did the best we
knew at that time.
Like with you and your husband, I mean, feeling guilty for having somebody come help around the house. I mean, you didn't do anything wrong by hiring someone else to come in and help out. You were trying to preserve your relationship. You did something very positive.
Well, it was help with him. But then on the other hand, I mean, the night that he died and I had taken him to the emergency room, he was able to communicate that. So when Ada and I took him to the emergency room at the VA, I will forever have guilt that I didn't get him out of there soon enough and that I didn't stamp my feet harder to get the right people to see him. You know, that because it happened, it was a weekend, you know, it was a Friday night. There was nobody with real expertise there. And I didn't know that. I didn't know the system well enough to know that it was a bad call to go. It's like, so sorry that he didn't need real emergency help during before 4:30 in the afternoon on a weekday. You know, so sorry, just didn't go that way. But that will be guilt for my lack of knowledge, for the lack of pushing harder, for, you know, I just didn't have enough information to do it well enough, and I wasn't anticipating that it would have resulted the way it resulted. So I don't think that'll ever go away. You know, I did the best I could knowing what I knew.
The best you could.
But, you know, and is there anything else I can do? No. But yet that's always, you know, if I had only, you know, it may or may not have ever made any difference, but that'll always be there. In my meta head, always thinking. You know, and that's a feeling, not an offense. Nobody else looks at me and says, "Oh, Sue."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an example of inappropriate guilt.
Okay.
Or maybe can you make peace with it?
Yeah, I think it's perfectly appropriate. I don't think it's inappropriate at all. I think it's you know, it's sorrow. It's feeling sorry that I didn't know enough at that time to make different decisions. So
But it's harming your life now.
no, I do what I do and it's fine, but it's there, but it's not.
It's a regret.
Yeah, it's a regret. That's a nice way of saying it. Thanks,
Yeah.
Mom. Yeah. Yeah. So it's, what do you mean by harm?
And you're at peace with the fact that he understood and loved you regardless, and you loved him. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
those regrets.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm. But in the same way, if, there are things that I can choose to be angry about with him, he made decisions that disabled him from communicating well enough with me. He made decisions to not pursue the speech apparatus, and because he didn't have the speech apparatus, it was like an ongoing guessing game of what was going on.
right.
So it's like, okay, if he lived, would he feel guilty that, that he didn't pursue that? If he had pursued that, he could have pushed a button and it would have said, can't breathe.
Help.
Really help,
Well, Jan, that was a very interesting topic about guilt being a bully. And as we are running out of our time here, and I'd like to maybe close off with a poem on decisions. If, that big old if, if this, if that. If is a word in the middle of life that can burden the soul and bring much strife. When thinking back on your yesterdays causes your mind to become ablaze, wondering what if and if only I'd, and from the outcome you want to hide. For hindsight is better than foresight, they say, and many a folk comes to rue the day. But in light of the information as you understood, you made a decision you thought was good.
That's nice. That's nice.
That's a good way to close today. So thanks everybody for being here, participating. Thanks for those of you who are watching, and we'll see you again next week for another edition of Greet the Week.